Welcome, everybody, to our next episode of the Bravery Blueprint here with Travis Yates and Brian Ellis. And thanks for the opportunity to listen to our thoughts. And, hopefully we inspire some good conversation and thought around some worthwhile topics. How you doing today, Travis?
Man, I'm doing awesome, Brian. And I think what you said means a lot. I mean, this is designed to inspire people, right? That's one of the core tenets I know we talk about in courageous leadership is to inspire others to lead courageously. Sometimes it just takes one, right? People have such this affinity to sort of sit on the sidelines, and this is not a time to do that.
No, 100%. And I think the topic that we're going to talk about today, hopefully it resonates with people because we have a tall task in front of us on it. I mean, if you look at engagement, and we're talking globally. I mean, the Gallup poll says that engagement sits around 30%. And I know if I took a 30% report card home to my parents as a kid, I would not have a weekend. And so, that disengagement costs the U.S. alone $500 billion annually. And if we really want to make America great, we really have to fix what's broken. What we know is broken. It's everywhere. You get on Google search and look at who's looking at toxic leadership, and and it's page after page after page after page. And we want to do this in a way again that's transformational. I don't want to spend time pointing fingers at anyone. I want to fix what's broken and move on and let everybody have the opportunity to thrive. And when I read your book, The Courageous Police Leader, I mean, I literally wore out my highlighter. And
thank you.
And mainly because there's just so many things in there that point to the things that we really need to fix. And so I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the topic.
Well, first off, Brian, it's the biggest honor ever as an author for another author as yourself to give me that compliment. So thank you. But when you talk about engagement, I assume you're talking about the apathy, right? People not wanting to get in the arena, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about disengagement is we're leaving a lot of, we're leaving a lot of energy and productivity on the table because, like in policing, I can tell you, one of the hardest working cops I know, it broke my heart when I was retiring. He said, they can't get your ass if you're sitting on it. And what frustrated me about that comment is he got to the point where everything that he did was under such scrutiny that he just chose not to work anymore. And at the end of the day, he suffers and all those people that admire him suffer, but the community suffers more than anyone else. And that's what frustrates me about not only, this topic in policing, but just in customer service alone. A quick story. I went to the beach with my family over the summer, and we rented some chairs and an umbrella from a service on the beach. And we go down the next morning and it's too windy. So they're like, oh, we're not going to, we can't put the umbrellas up. And I'm like, okay, well, then I must be entitled to some kind of, reduced price and paying for that stuff. And they said, no, we can't control the weather. And then I walk down the beach and I go to several other places a little bit further down the beach and everybody's umbrellas up except for the place that I'm at. And so, I was frustrated. I walked back and I went, wait a minute, you can under deliver and still get paid, and you're okay with that. And that goes back to one of the biggest issues that I think we have as a country. We have an integrity issue, and we have a courage issue. And if we start fixing our courage and integrity issues in this country, everybody, and I mean everybody, has the potential to thrive.
Yeah, man. Good for you. You've got more money than me. I can never afford those rentals because it's always crazy, right? It's funny you talk about that. One of the things I love about this show, Brian, is that we don't always talk. In fact, we never really talk before we get on the air. You say, hey, I want to have something to talk about. And this is sort of off the cuff, so there's no preparation for this. But it's funny you mentioned the integrity issue specifically. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn simply because it's kind of the last bastion that hasn't been politicized too much. You still see it once in a while, but you can still kind of get on there and talk business, talk leadership without anybody talking politics. That just drives me crazy. It's nothing but a distraction. And I had this idea a few weeks ago to post a poll. You may have seen it. And the poll said this. It said, has a supervisor ever lied to you? I didn't say leader, because leaders don't lie. But the auspice of it was, has a supervisor ever lied to you? I don't know what I was going to get out of the poll. I thought maybe it'd be 50-50 or whatever. Because integrity, as you said, that is the foundation. Like, we're going to all these fancy leadership schools and reading all these books. I mean, I read 50 or 60 a year. I've spent my adult life studying it. I never thought about, well, should we be thinking about lying or not lying? That to me is just a basic premise that if you're a good person, if you're a semblance of any leader, the entry level test to be a leader is to be honest. This poll came back 99% I've been lied to. Now it's worse than that, because like 129 people took the poll and I only had one person said no. So like 99.4% of the people that responded on that poll said, yeah, they've lied to me. And I thought to myself, if we can all agree, and I think we can agree with this, Brian, leaders don't lie. It's a core tenet in courageous leadership. We have these core principles, and one of them is integrity, of course. It should be a core principle in any leadership model. Well, if we say that leaders don't lie, and 99+% of the people in law enforcement said, yes, I've been lied to by the people I work for, what does that say about law enforcement leadership? It tells me we have very little of it. And that to me it brings out a lot of emotions. Heartbreak. I'm disheartened. I'm frustrated. I'm scared for the future if that's where we are today. And keep in mind, Brian, that's where we are today when we live in a day and time when there's more law leadership education and seminars and books in our profession, academies, you're involved in a great one, than ever before. And that's what we're getting. So my question is, how do we overcome that? Like, you and I love to talk about the high level leadership stuff, right? We love to have conversations about this. This is low level. This is the basic level. This is the foundation. What do we even do about that? Because you have to get to that before you even get to courage. It should not be courageous to tell the truth. That should be basic, right? So that's not a scientific study, but if that many people say, yeah, I'm being lied to, and some of the comments were, because as long as somebody's appointed, as long as it's political, as long as they're covering their own rear end, this is what we're going to get. What's going on here, do you think? What is happening? Do you have any ideas whatsoever?
It's a great point. I mean, because not only have I been lied to, I've been repeatedly lied to, and again, it's frustrating because I think there's a stark difference between a point or a conversation where you just can't give somebody all the facts. I mean, and I think we all know what those are. That there's times where questions arise, and you might not be able to be forthcoming to that person. That doesn't mean that you lie to them. It just means that you have a crucial conversation and say, hey, I can't tell you all the details of something. And
I don't
move
consider
on.
that part lying, though. Like
Yeah, but
you
I
could
think
say,
you
could
that,
say this. You could say, listen, I can't tell you exactly because of A, B, C, and D, right? That to me is a little more honest than just straight out lie. I will give you, I know I cut you off. I apologize, but both of us have these thoughts that plop in our head, but I'll give you one current example. I know a man personally that just became a police chief in a major metropolitan city who I know is a serial liar. And I know as a serial liar, he got ahead. He went up the ranks. He succeeded. He's seen in the community as this great servant, as this great leader of men. And I know for a fact he's a serial liar. So is that part of it, where people are seeing people like that get ahead by doing that, and we're modeling that behavior?
100%. I think as we get into this conversation, I definitely want to unpack some of this toxic leadership stuff. And again, I think toxic leadership in itself is a paradox, because if you're a leader, you're not toxic. Leadership is a verb. It's an action. You do it. But toxic leadership is a lexicon that everybody kind of understands, because they see people in positions do bad things to them, and because they are positional leaders. And I just think, again, a friend of mine today, I did the same today. I posted a poll on LinkedIn today about toxic leadership. What is the most harmful trait of a toxic leader? Is it a lack of empathy, micromanagement, dishonesty, or favoritism? And he came
Right.
back and said, well, there is no such thing as a toxic leader. You have a toxic boss, and we got to stop using negative words associated with leadership. And I fundamentally agree with him there. And the point that I was making to you earlier is I think that people don't understand the difference between I can't be completely forthcoming with something and a lie. Okay. And so the slippery slope is a lot of positional, or let's just call them bosses, okay? Because I want to even call them positional leaders. Let's just start calling them bosses. A lot of bosses aren't courageous enough to have a crucial conversation, and so they throw these little lies out there that they think are that are harmless, but they're very harmful. And then once you do it once and twice and three times, neurons that fire together wire together, and now you're a habitual liar. And so, again, I find this whole toxic leadership conversation, let's just call it toxic bosses. We really need to unpack it. We need to know how it happens, what's the result of it, and these are the things I want to get into, and then really from a transformational perspective, how do we grow? Because again, my post or my poll just went out today, and I've only got a couple people, but and I'm fascinated by the topic because we have so much work to do around this topic, and it isn't being done because we just don't have the courage to do anything about it. And again, I was a manager in a decent sized organization. I made mistakes all the time. It's just part about being a human being. And but I'm also somebody who's a good boy. Like I want to do good work, and I want to help my organization do its best job, and I want the people underneath me to thrive. And by doing that, I'm going to break stuff from time to time, and that should be okay. And in these bad or these toxic boss environments, all that goes out the door.
Well, there's a great book, one of the best ones I've seen on it, called Toxic Boss Blues. It's by Steve Neal. I interviewed Steve Neal on my podcast, Courageous Leadership with Travis Yates. I wrote the foreword for the second edition, and that gave me the opportunity to go back through his book again. It is, it's not a well-known book, but it's one of the best books on the topic. We'll put the link here in the show notes, Toxic Boss Blues. But I think before we get to the inner side of it is of why it's occurring, I think one of the big reasons is this. In leadership, there's almost a crossroads, right? Because you can be very successful in law enforcement as a supervisor or a manager, doing those things that you learned before you and people got ahead. We're human beings where we see how people are getting ahead, and we obviously emulate that. Many people listening to this have worked for maybe a terrible chief or a sheriff, and then they notice that people in between them and the chief and sheriff start acting very similar. And they're like, what's going on here? Well, that's what's going on, right? They see that that's the way they get ahead. They also reap the repercussions of when they try to be a leader, when they try to do the right thing, when they try to think outside the box, they get beat down. And they end up like your friend who said, hey, I can just sit on my rear end and get paid the same or whatever. And it takes a special type of courage to go, I'm going to fight that. Because what tends to happen when you fight that, Brian, your career will come to a halt. You can forget about it, right? You're going to not go to do the assignments. You're not going to be the good old boy. You're not going to be promoted anymore. And so there comes, I think, a decision for most people. And this is probably more in the middle ranks, right? I got up to the rank of sergeant and corporal, those first line level supervisor, extremely fun, a great, great rank. It changes once you get in the middle management because you have to sort of have your foot in the administration and your foot in the line level. And there's very much a tug and a pull. Let's just be honest about it. You have to make a decision when you get to the middle ranks, lieutenant and captain, probably in most departments, which is okay, am I going to just stay here and try to do the right thing and try to help out the troops, or am I going to vacate the troops and move to the other side, so to speak? It's so ridiculous. We have a joke about it. Oh, you got your spine removal surgery coming up, right? You know, we all laugh, ha ha. Well, if there's a joke about it, everybody knows, you know, there's a problem. And so I think the easy path, and this is for most people, you talked about the apathy earlier, the easiest path for people, whether you're in law enforcement or anything else, which is path of least resistance, right? Well, true leadership, if you study leadership, Brian, and there's probably nobody I know that studied it more than you. If you've studied leadership at a high level, you know that some of the greatest leaders we talk about broke that mode. They suffered mightily before they became the celebrity success that we know them today, right? I mean, Steve Jobs was kicked out of his own company. I mean, there were people that were pioneers in leadership that we all make movies about today, but they don't talk about what they had to go through. And so when you're in law enforcement, specifically, and you're really, unlike a private industry where, man, sometimes they reward that cutting edge idea or that person that's outside the box because it sometimes means more profit. In law enforcement, you're almost rewarded for status quo, and leaders should fight status quo. You know, if I ever hear we do this because we've always done it, that's a death knell to a law enforcement agency. But everybody here listening to this in law enforcement's heard that. And I came out of this profession bruised and beaten. I mean, I won't say it's PTSD, man, but I've been beaten pretty well. But I'm proud of that because I can remember the day I made the specific decision. But it would have been much easier. You may not even be talking. I probably wouldn't have written a book. I could be a police chief somewhere today potentially if I would have made the other decision. But what does that do, right? People need to be encouraged to take that maverick role because that's the only way legacy exists. That's the only way differences are made. I told somebody years before I retired, listen, my goal is that the day I retire, that I want to be revered by the line level and hated by the upper administrators. Well, that's fine when you say it, but when it actually happens, it doesn't always feel great. Everybody wants to be liked by their peers. But people need to understand that is what courage is. The easy way is the path of least resistance. Let's do what everybody else does. And unfortunately, in our profession, Brian, you can do that and get away with it and succeed. We all can list names right now in our head that have done that. Their pensions are padded. They've got great consulting jobs. They're involved in a bunch of stuff that you and I aren't involved in because they would never have us involved in that. But I just tend to think that if you got one life to live here on this earth, and man, I want to live it right. I want to do what's right. And that just doesn't always mix well with the masses.
Spot on. I mean, again, it was funny because when we first met, we shared a lot of similar stories. And since then we've shared even more similar stories. And it was essentially the same stories, just different patches. Mm-hmm. I got the same advice when I became a middle manager from a captain who ended up becoming a deputy chief, who, in my opinion, was very narcissistic. And he confused me a lot because he genuinely seemed to care about the organization, but he did things in ways that really, really hurt the organization. And it was just this very unique situation. But again, at the end of the day, he tells me, don't get too close to your troops. And I find that just so untrue. I mean, because at the end of the day, I can discipline somebody if they deserve discipline from a position of love. I could fire somebody from a position of love if that's what was needed to happen. And I think that's where we forget. We become so callous for a whole host of reasons. A lot of times it's some people have just never had the experience, so they just can't see some of the mistakes that people make because they never chased crooks. They were always kind of the last person to get on the call, or however it happens. And you're right. We have to fundamentally start to ask ourselves, okay, how does this stuff happen? When it happens, what does it produce? And then then the way forward. Because I again go back to, how do you be courageous? Well, it's a transformational action that sometimes requires us to be bold and maybe be by ourselves. And being by ourselves sometimes is very scary. But man, I can tell you this: I sleep peacefully at night knowing I gave it my all in my past profession, doing everything that I could possibly do for the right reasons. And you might not always agree with what I do, and I might have not always made the most perfect decision, but again, I can go back to any reunion, and people will, you know, it's good to see me.
Yeah.
I can go, I can sleep peacefully at night. And I'm not saying I don't have, there's not things that I wish were different.
Of course.
I mean, we lit this profession. We're going to make a lot of split second decisions that impact people, and that's a big shoulder to bear. Yeah. So I mean, again, let's kind of dive into some of the things, and because I'd love to get your thought. I mean, as I sit here and think about, I'm working on another book project right now on this very issue, and it's I think you'll like it when you know when I finally do release it, because we got to start looking at all these ways that things happen, and then lead with purpose. But you know, really, how I see it happens is, a lot of bad bosses are charismatic and charming, and so the appearance is that you're likable and you're confident, but they manipulate people, influential people. So by their sheer nature, they're politically savvy, and it produce they whether they produce short term gains, sometimes unethically, and then it's mistake for effective leadership. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's a big challenge for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, the interesting thing about charisma is we sometimes link charisma with great leaders, but charisma is also linked with narcissism. If you study what narcissism is, right? And you have to be very careful about that charismatic leader. Not that you can't be a great leader and have charisma. We all know those individuals, but that sometimes mask what's going on behind the scenes, right? The actual substance of it. And when you talk about toxic leadership, I think there's people out there listening that probably think to themselves, well, how do I prevent this from doing it myself, or how do I watch out for this? Listen, I think just like if we do a search warrant, Brian, we're going to pre-plan that. We get done with the search warrant, we're going to sort of evaluate that. And by the way, I think it's okay for us to say we've made mistakes. Where there's only been one perfect human being on this planet. It's definitely not us or any of you listening to this. And you acknowledge it, I acknowledge it. We can all look back and go, man, I could have done that better. But that is the sign of a leader, right? Evaluating what we do. But I think when it comes to people out there right now, to avoid this, because that's the first thing I want people to think about is I want to avoid being in this trap. You have to do a couple of things. You have to pre-plan it. You have to think to yourself, what is important? What is your why? Is it to get the next rank, or is it to really make a difference? Is it to have the best reputation from my politician or whoever, or is it what type of person am I? In my training, I talk about character versus reputation. Oftentimes people lean towards toxic leadership and all the things that comes with it, treating people the wrong way, disciplining inconsistently, lying, all these different things people will know about it. And that's because they're focused on reputation and not character. And that I understand why. Everybody wants to have a good reputation. Everyone wants to be liked by the masses. They know that's the way to get ahead. That's the way the community can get behind them, this and that. That's the way you keep your job oftentimes. But reputation's fleeting. Shakespeare said that. It can be ruined in a second, and it's not your fault. I'll give you an example. We both are involved in different publications, and the way the defamation law works, if it's opinion, you can't sue anybody for defamation. I know that because I filed a lawsuit against defamation before against the major media outlets, and that's what that law was claiming, even though it's not opinion. They wrote it as fact. And I can write an article right now about any single person, say it's an opinion piece, and I can say whatever I want. If you follow politics, you see this every single day, right? When they talk about politicians, and it will destroy you. It will destroy you. You get it up on the AP wire, you're done. The Phoenix Police Department, DLJ just came out with an investigation on Phoenix Police Department. When you read the summary report, anybody, if it's a cop that reads that, goes, this is nothing but like an opinion piece. Where's the evidence here? But it got blasted on thousands of news articles with Phoenix Police Department is this and it's that and it's racist and it's all doing all these horrible things. And it literally destroyed the agency's credibility, reputation. But you can't be worried about it as an individual reputation, because that is false. It can be taken for you doing nothing, Brian. I think both of us are probably a little bit of a victim of that, right? You do the right thing and they will go after your reputation to try to undermine you. So you have to start off in leadership at this point. I don't care about reputation because I don't control reputation. People out there listening may think you control it. Trust me, you don't control it. If you haven't had it tarnished yet, just buckle up. It's going to happen if you work this job for any amount of time. But character is another level. They can never take my character. They can never affect that. They can never change who I am as a person. And that is directly tied to the effectiveness of the leader. Everybody out here listening, if you think of the 3 great leaders in your mind right now, and then you step back from that, you're going to know they're people of great character. And that is where it all has to start. If you let that go, I think you have an affinity to lead down the toxic route. And you may not even know you're doing it, right? Because you're maybe just trying to get ahead. You're trying to get more money. You're trying to get promoted. You're thinking about your family. You may not even know you've stepped off into that, but you have to take a step back and evaluate that. So that to me is the first line that we have to sort of pre-plan how we're going to act. Listen, it's in all our natural inclination, Brian, is me, myself, and I. I can show you scripture and I can show you hundreds of thousands of examples of that. That's our pre-inclined disposition. The Bible calls it sin. Other people may call it something else, selfishness or whatever. That is my inclination. Every day I'm looking out for me, myself, and I. I want to put my I love me wall up. I want to talk about my certificates and my accomplishments and me, myself, and I. I want to put the bumper sticker on the car that says my first graders on the honor roll, you name it. But leaders can't do that. You've got to fight that. People have this tendency to think that leadership is automatic, that it's natural. People are naturally, no, that's not true. Naturally, you're a jerk. Naturally, you're about you. Naturally, you will throw people under the bus to protect yourself. And leaders say, no, they have to reject that. And you have to go into that knowing that, right? You have to watch out for that, constantly watching out for those traps. And there's plenty of traps in law enforcement that will send you down the wrong path.
100% character's destiny, right?
Yep.
But this is the interesting thing when you think about brain science, because what you're talking about is legitimate brain science. I mean, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basic survival, right? And not only in that survival, it's psychological safety. And so your brain is hardwired for survival. It's not rational. It's not emotional. It's to move the muscles in motion and pump blood and fight off illness and have these chemical responses to keep you alive. And so that makes you human. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you human. Leadership, again, we go back to it. It's a verb. It's an action. It's skill-based. It's behavioral and skill-based. And so if you want to be a leader, you have to act like a leader and you have to do the things that leaders do. And nobody's perfect.
Right.
Just quite frankly, nobody's there. So, I think it's important when it happens in organizations, because I think, we're making a good line in the sand in regards to, kind of how to identify it. I think everybody really knows how to identify a bad boss and somebody that, what you said earlier is, I've looked at some journalism, they're false light, right? False light is painting this picture that's, it's using certain facts to make it look overwhelmingly, convincingly that you are a bad guy or your position sucks. We see these narratives all the time, and it's just not true. And again, it goes back to, when we're in these bad boss behaviors, it's a breeding ground for a lack of oversight and favoritism and nepotism. And then when people that are in power are bad bosses, they bully, they retaliate, they blame. And all that stuff leads to poor cultures and high stress and inadequate training. That's kind of authoritarianism where external issues become overly heightened and blown out of proportion, and then there's no pushback against it. What cops are really good at is we're just going to be cynics about it. We're going to take it because if you try to push back on it again, you're going to get bullied, retaliated, or blamed. In an organization that has an internal affairs unit that can just put you in the box and stress you out. And so you really just don't, sometimes you just don't have any options to fight back, or at least perceptually. And again, I go back in this conversation, I go back to the number one person that's hurt the most when these things happen in public safety is the community. They're the number one people who suffer. And so we have to figure a better way forward.
Well, I'm also interested in the officer or the sergeant or the middle manager that's out here listening, and they're in this environment, right? And they don't subscribe to it, and they're different. They're outside the box. They want to be a leader. I want to give them hope, right? How do you overcome that? How do you deal with that? And one things that I've learned is, because timing was never been my strong suit. Like I just fought. But sometimes I think we ought to talk about there's a time and place, right? Sometimes you have to sit there and think to yourself, this isn't right, but I'm just going to sit here for the moment. And is there another way to fight that, right? One of the things I used to do, if there was a lack of training, people would ask me around the country, what do I do about this? I think this is very dangerous. What's going on? I would say, hey, have your wife, write a letter and put, write to your wife a letter of your thoughts. You think you're in a dangerous environment because the department's not training, and you get that letter dated and you sign and you seal it. So if something does happen, you've got that, because you running up to the chief's office and screaming and yelling is probably not going to do what you want to get done. Right. And so are there some things that, because we're definitely not wanting people to just fight to fight, just always fight, because trust me, I was guilty of that oftentimes. And not that I was able to get some things done, but at times it probably did more damage than it did good, because that's all I knew. When something was wrong, I was so strong headed about it being wrong. I would just verbalize it no matter where I was, even if it was in front of a bunch of chiefs or in a staff meeting or whatever else it is. I'll never forget, I was in this, recent years, when everybody decided that LVNR was a deadly force all of a sudden, even though we'd done it for 50 years and there's been no death or serious injury associated with lateral vascular neck restraint. People watched on UFC every weekend. I'm in this freaking meeting and they're talking about the use of force policy being changed, and this is now deadly force. And everyone's like, oh, yeah. Of course, it's post George Floyd, who did not die from LVNR, but that didn't stop all these so-called leaders from changing their policy. And I was the only guy. I'm like 14 people in the room. I'm like, what is this about? What's going on here? Why are we taking this tool away? We've been doing this and training this, and it's been very effective. It's no doubt probably saved officers' lives because it's a tool we have. And it just looks bad. It just looks bad, Travis. And of course, I didn't take that very well, and I probably said some things I shouldn't have said. So my point of all that is, there's a time to fight, there's a time not to fight. What's your thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, it's funny because another Travisism that Brian has lived, and I have always said that, it's hard because a dog in the hunt doesn't stop to scratch his fleas, right? So, right. And that's, you have to know when you're in those moments kind of how to pull your reins back and try to start thinking strategically. And I think that's just really where time under tension, if you really want to get good at leadership, it's looking at the skills and behaviors that will make you lead better. And you don't have to have any particular position to do that. Matter of fact, I'm of the thought that every officer is a leader, every
Oh yeah,
single one.
100%,
And
100%.
it's up to them to decide what kind of leader that they want to be, whether it's leading people, leading themselves, their family. I mean, again, we are all leaders. So fundamentally, you have to start. And I think again, we also know that the older we get, the easier this stuff gets because we're a little bit more. We're not as wound tight. In my younger years,
Yeah.
I was a lot more wound tight about things than you know uh, who I am today. Uh, and and so part of that's just practice, right? I mean, the brain, again, like we said earlier, is neurons that fire together, wire together. It's Hebb's law, where we actually have to do it, and we have to do it repeatedly. And if we're not doing it repeatedly, then it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately for us, our brains are talking to each other without our knowing. And it's a survival mechanism. And so if people are treating people poorly, the natural reaction to that is, well, crap, I've got to just like be quiet. I got to survive. And what we're hoping to do, again, I want to go back and be transformational. I'm not asking people, just like you, I'm not asking people to fight, but I want people to thrive. And sometimes thriving means that we do have these tactical action plans where we do have a line of demarcation and we say enough's enough, and let's fix what's broken, because every statistic out there says it's broken. 30% disengagement, toxic leadership articles and opinions up the wazoo on Google. So we do have to fix something.
Well, on that note, Brian, let's talk about that. Let's just make it to the highest level, a brand new chief in an agency that has identified toxic leadership traits around them. How do you start changing that culture when it comes to that? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, again,
you could say this is a squad, this is a shift. You could take us to every level. Let's just take it to the highest level. A brand new chief comes in, maybe it's in that same organization, and they know that the things aren't right. How do they start?
Well, if you're a chief in an organization where you've identified as you come in that there's some smell of toxicity, you're in the best position possible, because you get to decide the fate of that organization.
And unlike the private industry, they can't just boot all the people out that are toxic, right? I mean, those people are in positions through civil service, and so they have to work with that.
Yeah. And so here's what's interesting to me is, as I've studied this and watched things happen, I think there's the knowingly toxic folks, and then there's the people that are they're unknowingly doing things. Mm-hmm. They're mirroring behaviors out of sheer survival, and they may or may not even know that these things are kind of inherently, a poor leadership. So, the first step is to come in and just have that crucial conversation. It's being courageous enough to say, hey, look, we're going to turn the lights on. Sunshine's the best disinfectant, right? And then we're going to just kind of roll up our sleeves to figure out, what was it that got us here in the first place? Was it favoritism? Was it these, lack of oversight? Did we have poor promotional processes? I mean, the more that we can kind of get into a place of giving everybody in the organization opportunities to thrive, I definitely think that, let's face it, not everybody in an organization wants to promote to being a police chief. Not everybody does. Some of the best cops that I ever worked with wanted to be patrolmen their entire careers. Because they loved the job. They loved the ability to be a street leader, to be, in the community and doing, having that autonomy and being able to, clock in and clock out without the pains and the worries of that organization constantly attacking them when they're on, when they're off the clock, essentially. And leaders sometimes, you just don't get the opportunity to be off the clock a whole lot. So I think those leaders have a really good opportunity, but they have to just start making a game plan and having that line of demarcation.
Yeah, I've gamed this out. I don't know if I'll ever be in that position because I don't know if the good Lord will have that type of role in my future. But I've talked to many people. In fact, I sent you a contact this week of somebody that's about to be a new chief who's going to be a great one. And I actually told this to him. But my idea would be the group of people in a toxic culture that knows full well the toxicity is the line level. Because sometimes, like you said, Brian, when you're in it, when you're in that middle or upper management, you're involved in that, you don't always see the forest through the trees. You're sort of inside of it, right? But the people that know the difference, that can see it, that saw it change, saw why it changed, are the people, the line level personnel. And so my idea would be, I don't care what size the organization is. I'm walking in day one to my secretary and I'm saying, I want a 30-minute meeting with every person in this department. Schedule it out. Oh, well, if there's 500 people, it's going to take you 6 months. Get it on. Get it on. Maybe I can only do that 4 hours a day, but I want to talk to every single person in that organization. And I think you would learn a lot of what's going on in that organization through that. That's not typically what happens. I've been in organizations where chiefs have changed, and I saw the dirtiness of that, because what tends to happen is the worst. It's hard to even call them leaders, but the toxic, the people that are the reason it's so toxic are the ones that get connected to that chief right off the bat. They're call it sucking up or whatever you call it, right? But they will attach themselves to that new chief like a chameleon, and they're very charismatic oftentimes, and they fall for it oftentimes. And the chief is right there in the middle of it, because especially if you come inside an organization, you're going to look to your deputy chief, you're going to look to your commanders, and you're going to think they're telling you the truth because you're not familiar with the organization. So when they say this, and this, man, you're going to think to yourself, well, they're probably being pretty accurate here. But if you talk to the line officers, that's where you're really going to get the honesty. And then it takes the courage to go, this is who I'm going to believe versus these higher ranks, because that's going to really break the mold. That's just a quick thought on it.
Well, I mean, it's exactly why I do what I do today with MagnusWorks, right? We're a data analytics company with education. Imagine us, we're like Gallup and University of Phoenix had a baby, right? Yeah. And so, having that level of openness, what you just described, everybody getting their opportunity with the chief. I mean, man, I'll tell you right now, that's tough, and I'll tell you why, because we go back to psychological safety, and data. If it's garbage in, it's garbage out, right? And so, how do I know, even if you're a brand new guy, that you really want to hear what I have to tell you?
Yeah.
So the challenge in doing these interviews that way, and I love when people collaborate and connect with each other, and I definitely think a good leader takes it on the chin and listens to things that even he's or she is doing wrong, and can take it from the janitor if need be. But we're just not wired that way. And so at MagnusWorks, we give everybody the opportunity to share their feelings across a whole base of psychological construct with the safety of anonymity, meaning there is absolutely no way that even our company can connect your responses back to your personal identity.
And you can customize that, right, Brian? Like if you're a new chief and you say, man, I need to know these answers, you could customize that in the app to get those answers for that chief. And it's anonymous.
We could essentially pull any question that you wanted to in an organization. We have our own constructs that we develop, our own psychological profiles for an organization that shows an executive staff all their pain points organizationally and individually for people. Because I think it's important too that not all of your problems when you're a leader in an organization, not all your problems are organizational issues. Sometimes our people are struggling outside of work, but that affects the workplace. And so if we take the stance that, well, that's their problem, I can't fix their marriage at home. Well, you might not be able to fix their marriage at home, but a leader would give everybody resources to help them in some capacity thrive. And if those resources are kind of baked into the whole process, it makes it icing on the cake for an organization to go, okay, well, here's an opportunity for me to do everything I can do organizationally and help this person individually. At the end of the day, that person is going to be a lot more loyal to my organization, knowing that we're doing everything that we can possibly do to help you be your highest and best. Can you please perform for us? And that's kind of what we're after. And so I go back to the psychological safety thing. I've been there. I had a new chief came in, and he did just that. He didn't do it with the whole organization. He did it with every manager in the organization. And I was truthful. And looking back on it, I think that me being truthful significantly, it was a death blow, so to speak, because he went, this guy's trouble. And I didn't say anything in a negative way. I pointed out some of the inherent issues we had. We had an overly competitive management staff, and when you're that competitive, and there's not an opportunity to build team sport, again, our brains are communicating with one another, whether we're conscious of it or not. And that energy, if me and you can't fundamentally trust each other, my energy systems, my basic metabolic energy systems are being taxed. And that's causing my brain to shut down or push back as at the whole organization at times. And then it leads to not being creative. And I mean, it's just fundamentally crappy for our bodies. And so we are hardwired for trust. We're hardwired for good things, not for bad things. We can survive bad things as long as we have a good, healthy, full, happy bucket. And so that's why when we started to build this platform at MagnusWorks, we fundamentally believed in, we know because we looked at professional athletes. If you look at a professional athlete and a coach goes to a professional athlete and says, how are your legs today? What do you think the response is going to be?
They're great. Yeah,
they're great. You're not affecting my playing time, right? And so, those questions are great, but again, it goes back to that psychological safety is really
there's so much to that. There's so much to that psychological safety. I always believed that if I was in my office all day, I was doing something wrong. So I always wanted to be out and about with the troops. And I'll never forget, I'd jump in a car and do ride-alongs, or I'd go out to an assignment, because I used to have assignments where I had 7 or 8 different locations where the assignments were, whether it's bomb squad or helicopter or whatever. Well, a few times a week, I would just hit the ground with them, but when I first started doing that, no one had ever done that, and they wouldn't say a word. They wouldn't say a word. I would try to get it out of them. They wouldn't say a word. But after a while, right, they would. And so you're right. There's a trust level that you have to get to where they're going to open up to you. Now, it was powerful when they did, but yeah, I think you're right. I think just a brand new chief talking to people, you probably wouldn't get the honesty that you want. That's why I think what you're doing there at MagnusWorks is so powerful. Something I don't think we've ever had before. And I just can't recommend enough people to go grab that. We'll put the link down here in the podcast notes, but, yeah.
Well, it's funny, Travis, when I was a sergeant, and I think I read a book or it was an article or something, and it was the power of 360-degree evaluation. And I was like, okay, well, we do evals on our employees all the time, but nobody does an eval. The boss doesn't give their employees an eval. So I did that one year, and I was running a little specialized team, and I give them an eval on me, and I researched. I had good questions on there because I wanted a good response with this, and I had a good team that we were pretty close, and they all responded back, and every one of them was like straight notes to Comedy Central, right?
Yeah.
It was like Dave Chappelle and Richard like every comedian came out of the woodwork to write a roast of Sarge on this eval. Um, and so that was funny, and I still kept those just as mementos. But I had to go back to them and say, "Hey, I really want this information. So
Yeah.
I'm not asking you just because I want you to kiss my butt. I literally I want to know. I want to know if my
Yeah.
assumptions about myself are accurate or if I'm way off base." And so I asked them to redo them. And when they did that, it was so refreshing to see the brutal honesty. And again, the vast majority of it was really good. And then you could see the things that they were like, "Hey, I wish you could X more."
Right.
And you're like, "Yeah, I'm a little intense in these moments," and that's right up in my personality, and it helped me tremendously. And then from that point forward, it was a part of my every year thing. Is I did my evals on everybody as soon as they were done, and because I didn't want to ask them for an eval on me before I did, and I didn't know who they were coming from anyway. But um, I would do my evals. I'd have everybody sign them, and then I'd ask them, for an eval on myself. And I did that for the next, I don't know, 11 years of my career. And it allowed me to see consistently who I was.
Well, that self awareness is the key, right? I mean, that self awareness is the key. We get back to the brain science. We all think we're better than we are. If you ask the common police officer, "You're a good driver," they all say we're awesome. Well, we know from the data that we're not that good of drivers. If you ask somebody overweight, "Are you overweight?" they're going to say no, right? Because we look in the mirror, we don't see what everybody else sees. So having the ability as a leader to have that self awareness and to solicit that information, that's pretty rare, but that's pretty powerful when you can pull it off.
Yeah, and again, the flaws that I have. I mean, again, the things that they said, "Hey, I wish you could do a better job at fixing." Universally, they came back to just my personality. I'm a let's go type of person,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes I don't want to sit and think, and sometimes that stresses people out. I'd rather, have a partial plan than the fully functional A to Z. We've thought about everything, and let's just go. Let's make the action happen. Um, I wrote down from your book. I wrote this down because I love this proverb, and I'll tell you one of the reasons that I love it, and I think it dovetails nicely into what we're saying. You used a Tuscarora proverb in your book. It said, "Those who have one foot in the canoe and one foot on the shore are going to fall in the river."
Yeah. Yeah.
And it made me laugh. It made me initially think, well, you can completely be in the canoe and still fall in the river. My wife and I were vacationing, and we rented some kayaks, and I'm in the water. I'm in the kayak. I've been in the water for 2 minutes, and I'm in the kayak, and I shift my big backside over, and I completely roll. And after 3 minutes of her hysterically laughing, some boat next to us, the guy hands me a beer, says, "Hey, you deserve that. That was an awesome move. I've never seen somebody get into the water and roll a canoe that or kayak that fast." But I love this analogy because sometimes, the distractions that we have are the things that are impacting us the most.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier in the show. Even if you try to appease both sides, you please nobody, right? And that's the life of a politician. That's why their Gallup ratings are some of the lowest we've ever seen, right? They're always trying to appease both sides. But in leadership when you try to do that. Once again, that goes to honesty and transparency and everything else. When you try to do that, it's pretty much a dismal failure. You may think you're getting ahead, right? But at the end of the day, people smell that out like it's nothing. Everybody's worked for somebody that's tried to do that at all times. You change your opinion, you change your thinking, you change everything you do to try to please everybody. It's a recipe for disaster.
100%. Well, are there any final thoughts you have for our audience on this topic?
I mean, I think this is gold, Brian. I appreciate you bringing the topic up. We're going to have to come back to it. I appreciate everybody listening. This is probably just as much medicine for me than hopefully our audience, because I think talking about these issues, we don't do enough of it. Once again, we always like to pat ourselves on the back. We always like to show what books we're reading on social media and what schools we've been to and this and that. But I think having these dialogues is so valuable. So I certainly hope our audience keeps coming back and keeps participating. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to come as we get into this. I mean, I think we're going to do some of these live. We're going to do some seminars around what we're doing. And so I love it. We got to keep it up because I think we got a lot of people to help out there.
100%. And I would just encourage people to share your story, and whether it's, with somebody that you know, or with us. I mean, I love to hear the stories and see how, we can just have a bigger discussion. If this inspired you to have a conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Because again, the more that we talk about these
Yep.
Challenges that we have, the more opportunity that we have to rise above them and overcome.
Yeah, man. Subscribe to it on your favorite platform and be sure to, give it a ranking that's going to help us out. We want certainly people to get exposed to it. Go to thebraveryblueprint.com. Give us suggestions on guests, comments, questions. We'd love to answer them here.
Okay. Thanks again for your time, Travis.
Thanks, Brian.